Okay, sorry. So this was the goal of the project was to write a public science article about the history of British HCI and to produce a short video. So this is, what is bringing me here today to present. So again, this is a working project, so I always conceive this as a kind of warm-up for a bigger, longer project about the history of British HCI. And in particular, during these couple of years, I recorded a few oral history interviews, but also I met with some of HCI pioneers in the UK, but this is an ongoing project, and I will be very, very, very happy also from people in the public to hear if they have to say something more, to contact me. You'll have my contacts at the end of the talk. So this is also a kind of work in progress that's also involving you today. The interest in HCI is also related to an IEEE Annals of the History of Computing special issue that I curated together with Shackel, and in particular that was also linked to my master's thesis in architecture. That was about the first computer by Olivetti, a mainframe of the late 50s, early 60s, and a science system that was developed at the time for the interaction between humans and that particular mainframe computer. Actually, I presented that bit of research in 2019 at the Computer Conservation Society meeting, so quite a number of years ago, but there is a recording if you're interested. So the interest in the British HCI, there is an interest in the topic, not just by me in particular. Like there was in July 2020, Alan Dix at the University of Swansea, online, of course, because that was 2020, had a workshop that involved some of the pioneers. There was, of course, as I explained, these new series of oral history for the archives of IT. But last year, in June 2024, there was a reunion at the University of York of the HCI people. And they were very kind to invite me, so I had the chance to meet many of them. And I also presented a little bit of this research in a conference in Barcelona, the European Society for the History of Science, last September 2024. But the interest in the history of HCI is broader, and of course also pioneers in the US have been, collecting, recording, and publishing their personal recollections. So there is a very thick and interesting book by Brad A. Myers that was published by the ACM in 2024, Pick, Click, Flick, The Story of Interaction Techniques. There was recently, like in the end of January 2025, at the Charles Babbage Institute, there was a talk by Aaron Marcus, HCI UX History, A Personal Perspective. And there are, of course, also other publications, the Jonathan Grudin's book and other papers. So there is an interest in the history of HCI. And not only, so it's not something that is just, my personal field, actually, but the interesting time is now because a lot of pioneers have started collecting all the memories. And in particular, there is Encounters with HCI Pioneers by Ben Schneiderman. It's online, so you can find it's like profiles and the photo collection. So it's very, again, these are personal accounts. So I think it's a good time for researching and to talk to people that really, it's the right time to start collecting the history of HCI. In particular, you can find the article online, but the title of the article I wrote for the Archives of IT and WCIT was From Punch Cards to Brain-Computer Interfaces. It's a public science article, so it also touches the main developments, which I'm not going to talk about today. And so from mainframe computers, the computer becomes personal. And also I speak a little bit about the early HCI communities in the UK in particular, but it's a bit more extended than what I'm going to present today. And in particular, there was like, the focus was about engaging the general public. So the incipit, the beginning of the article is like, today we live in a world where computers are intimately integrated into society and influence many aspects of it. Interacting with computers and other technological devices is something we do every day in multiple ways. Often we can function in society without being digitally connected. So when and how did computers enter our everyday life? How did our relationship with computers evolve over the years? So these are some of the questions I asked a number of UK professionals who spent their lives researching the field. So in the article in particular, I started by exploring the beginnings of human-computer interactions, focused in particular on the rise of the discipline in the UK and on its UK pioneers. I then looked at how HCI has changed in both direction and significance in the light of the World Wide Web and more recent technologies, evolving from touch-based interaction to voice user interfaces. And I also reflected on the impact of HCI on society and how it can put people at advantage or at disadvantage. In particular, I also focused on the theme of computers and healthcare and the Internet of Medical Things, leading up to the brand new experiments around brain-computer interfaces. So, and this is the video that is kind of a teaser to the article and has some little tiny abstract pieces of the interviews.
We have made a world now where to be a citizen of the 21st century, you need to be digitally connected. What is human-computer interaction? That's a difficult question. I think of it personally as every aspect of understanding the way that computers interact with people, but at all scales, from society and the political implications, all the way through to the fine-scale pressing key on a keypad, moving a mouse or touching a screen. The major change that should we say, created the germ of what was human-computer interaction as a discipline is now was really around the late 70s, particularly early 80s, and it was the personal computer. It was when computers shrank from being a room-sized thing to being a deskable thing. But that then meant that you were thinking about individuals working with computers. The web changed who used computers. More people could use them, but they could choose whether to use them or not. The ubiquity now has changed that picture. So if you want to buy an airline ticket, if you want to fill out your tax return, it is difficult not to use a computer.
Chris Evans at the National Physical Laboratory was a really interesting character in early HCI. He wrote a book called The Mighty Micro. This I bought in 1979. He really invents ubiquitous computing, way ahead of the American interest in ubiquitous computing. He said computers will get smaller and smaller, and they will be soon as ubiquitous as chewing gum that gets stuck on your feet. They'll be everywhere.
When Windows and what you see is what you get appeared, blind people who've been able to use computers were not able to use it anymore. we tend to design for what people call ordinary users. I'm interested in extraordinary users, a positive way of looking at people with disabilities. So we can learn a lot about HCI from looking at disabled users.
So I think the impact of HCI isn't always obvious. You see bad design, whereas good design is often invisible. When you could see people interacting physically with devices, it was clear what the ethical issues could be. But much interaction now is indirect. It's interacting with data, it's interacting with algorithms, it's interacting with sensors, it's interacting with systems that you're not physically touching anymore. That's more difficult to deal with because those interactions are intangible.
Okay, so you can find it online if you want to watch it again. So, human-computer interaction in Britain. So the history of British HCI is rich. Brian Shackel's article, Ergonomics for a Computer, published as early as 1959, is considered one of the first articles in the history of HCI. From the 1970s onwards, several British centres in the UK focused on HCI research and development, such as the Man-Machine Interaction Group, Man-Computer Interaction Group at the National Physical Laboratory, and the HUSAT at the University of Loughborough, among others. The BCS Specialist Group on Human-Computer Interaction was established in 1984, playing a role in the development of the field in the UK and in connecting with the international community. The British HCI Conference was one of the early international conferences that shaped the discipline, while the Alvey Programme, driven by industrial priorities, influenced and gave strength to HCI in the UK. And as I started my article, I'm going to start my presentation about the topic with these image. So in April 1981, Byte magazine cover showed an illustration of what today we could identify as a smartwatch or a wearable computer. It showed a miniaturized version of a computer fitted to the shape of a metal watch in the fashion of the time, with all the desktop computer interface elements. A tiny phosphor video screen, a tiny keyboard, where it would be impossible to type, and a very small floppy disk. The Mons team was about possible future computers. Although the magazine advised, keep in mind the proximity of April 1st. The illustration by artist Robert Tinney is interesting because it shows the miniaturization of computers increasingly become a personal and wearable object and essential to our everyday life. So what is HCI? So I'll use the answer I got from Professor Alan Dix of Swansea University. HCI pertains to all the aspects related to how we interact with computers. It relates to both the understanding of how we use digital devices and how to design this interaction in a way that is better for us. It involves every aspect of people using computers, from the fine scale of pressing a key, moving a mouse, touching a screen, to the economic, societal, and political impact of this in a world where computers are an intimate part of society and influence every aspect of it. And HCI, it's a multidisciplinary which combines the theories and practice from a number of research fields, including ergonomics, industrial design, psychology, anthropology, sociology, computer science, medicine, and more. The establishment of human-computer interaction as a modern academic discipline began during the 1970s, late 1960s, and initially it was referred to as man-machine interaction, if you forgive the sexism of the age, as Professor Alan Dix pointed out. After World War II, electronic mainframe computers required big rooms filled with bulky racks, and they were built with thermionic valves first and transistors later. The computer installation was made of several pieces of equipment and needed a team of engineers and operators to make it function and keep it working. So, what is ergonomics? It is a science concerned with designing machines and other things people use so they can interact most efficiently, safely, and comfortably with their intended users. It has to do with our human bodies, brains, and senses interacting safely with easy-to-use machines. And in particular, ergonomics and human factors became of importance during Second World War when pilots and other soldiers were under pressure operating the controls of aircrafts and other machines. Brian Shackel understood very early how important ergonomics was to the development of the computer industry. He had a degree in classics at Cambridge, and after the service in the Royal Navy, he returned to Cambridge to take a master's degree in psychology. A UK pioneer figure in HCI, he completed his study of human-computer interaction by redesigning the console of the EMIDEC 2400 computer while working at EMI. And he understood that the computer revolution needed an injection of human factors to ensure computers could be properly used by people. And in the next slide, there is like some kind of recap by Professor Shackel from the late 90s of the evolution. So what changed with computers and the user issues that come with that. So if we look at the 50s, the users were mathematicians, scientists, and the user issues were machine reliability, and users had to learn to program. With mainframes in the 60s and the 70s, the users were data processing professionals, and the user issues was the output, the cost, the lack of flexibility. With mini computers, users still did much of the programming, and usability became a problem. But with the advent of microcomputers and personal computers, usability became a major problem. And then, from the 1990s onwards, of course, there was an increased complexity, also because computers were starting to be used by anyone. So in this part of the project, I am focusing in mapping the British communities before and after the Alvey Programme. So in particular, like one of the first scientists that was involved, of course, after Brian Shackel, was Christopher Evans at the National Physical Laboratory. In the 1970s, the field of human-computer interaction was still in its infancy, and there were only a few centers in the UK. There was in particular, at the National Physical Laboratory, Christopher Evans, that arrived in 1964, and started working on man-computer interaction. NPL was a major government research laboratory, and the National Standards Centre was located in Tendington, near London. It was also famous in part because Alan Turing worked there on the ACE computer project after the Second World War. And there's a quote by Diane Murray, who worked at NPL beginning in the 1980s, that describes the atmosphere there. And it was like very much a research laboratory and more like a university campus than an organization. The atmosphere was very serious, but very innovative as well, because we were allowed to do essentially blue sky research without necessarily having a particular goal or a particular product which we had to develop at the end of it. In particular, Christopher Evans, so I already introduced him. He was a writer and a science journalist with a passion for science fiction. Did a national service with the Royal Air Force, and then got a degree in psychology at University College London. But also a PhD in pattern perception and the stabilized retinal image at the University of Reading that got in the beginning of the 60s. And one of his research was how to improve the communication between people and computer. And there's this quote, it's like, the principal program of computing science today is no longer engineering one, but a psychological one. We're not talking about communication simply as a manipulation of knobs and the inspection of dials, but rather as a social and intellectual level as well. But some of you, especially in the history of computing, might have heard of Christopher Evans, because he was one of the first to record 20 interviews for the Science Museum in London with pioneers of computing. I think they are not published, with the exception of a couple that are shown here at the beginning of the 80s in the IEEE Annals of the History of Computing. But also was quite a character because he was also big friend with J.G. Ballard. And in his autobiography, J.G. Ballard describes Evans as the closest friend I ever made in my life. And Evans even inspires one of J.G. Ballard's characters from the hoodlum scientist Vaughan in his novel Crash. Another thing you might not know about Christopher Evans is that he also, when he was at the National Physical Laboratory, he designed a typeface called Alphabet in 1969 with Timothy Epps. And this idea was to create an alphabet using existing symbols, but in a form that was suitable for machine handling. So the idea is to have a cathode ray device in mind, so no curves, no diagonals, and a grid system to aid scanning with a minimum of 5 units. So this is some kind, I have it if someone is curious about it later. I can show it to you. And so yes, this was another kind of experimentation that was done at the National Physical Laboratory. And that was actually, it was the response of Wim Crowell, of another alphabet that was designed by Wim Crowell in 1967, again, with the computer in mind and cathode ray tubes in mind. But maybe some of you not know that Christopher Evans was also the one that helped Yasia Reichert to find the title to the famous Cybernetic Serendipity exhibition that was in London in the late 60s and was one of the first computer art exhibitions. So, but at National Physical Laboratory, Christopher Evans also worked with Nigel Bevan. And Nigel Bevan was another pioneer at the National Physical Laboratory, and he was persuaded that the importance of international standards to improve the design of user interfaces. And one of his concerns and a major field of research was the potential negative effect on health and posture working with visual display terminals. And he began his research in man-machine interaction, researching keyboard and keypad layouts for his PhD. And then he joined the National Physical Laboratory in '73, and he remained there for 25 years, becoming the head of the HCI group and the head of the usability section. And Bevan and Evans worked together, initially on physical interfaces for the disabled, and on a doctor-patient medical interviewing application called MITI. And this application was also displayed in the London Science Museum during the 80s. But, you know, when we think about Christopher Evans, we also have to think about his book, The Mighty Macro, that actually came out when he was, unfortunately, when he died of cancer at 48 years old in 1979. So we often think that the landmark article introducing ubiquitous computing is Mark Weiser's piece in Scientific American, published in September in 1991. Weiser worked at Xerox PARC in the end of the 1960s, where he developed the concept. But about 10 years earlier, Christopher Evans anticipated the concept in his book, The Mighty Micro. And that was also published in the US with the title, The Micro Millennium. So continuing mapping the HCI communities in the UK, I've already mentioned Brian Shackel and the HUSAT research group. Shackel left the ergonomics lab of EMI at the end of the 1960s and moved to Loughborough University as professor of industrial ergonomics. And there he set up the Human Sciences and Advanced Technology Research Group that later will become an institute. HUSAT was actively involved in assessing work applications, drawing attention to issues of user-friendliness and inadequate system specifications. Projects were initiated to assist design teams in accurately defining user requirements and creating functional and user-friendly modes of interaction. So a significant portion of funding at HUSAT originated from industrial channels. Research Council funds also contributed to investigations concerning the human consequences of computer applications. And the group approach involved forming close collaboration with both technology providers and users, and whenever feasible, offering tangible contribution to emerging advancements. And as an example, Tom Stewart, a founding member of HUSAT, was working on displays and how to make these legible, comfortable, minimizing eye strain, set at the right height, and so on. The team at HUSAT also comprised Ken Eason, Lila de Moderan, and other younger, at the time, enthusiasts like Martin McGuire. And Professor Ernest Edmonds, remember when he set up one of the earliest British groups on HCI at Leicester Polytechnic during the 70s. And by 1974, he was head of the computing department, and human-computer interaction became the research focus there. They were, of course, in touch with Loughborough University, and they formed an alliance with them. While HUSAT was concerned with the human factors side of it, they were more concerned with the implication of those human factors for the technology. How you should design software, what should the software architectures be, and all these kind of questions. And Edmonds has made other significant contributions to the field, funding the Human-Computer Interface Research Center at Leicester Polytechnic in 1982, and establishing the Loughborough University of Technology Computer-Human Interaction when he moved to Loughborough in 1986. And these are just, other examples of other communities. Another important community was the Ergonomics unit at UCL that was founded in the mid-1960s with a focus on the physical environment, and later interests shift towards the cognitive, and the unit moved to be associated with the psychology department under the leadership of Professor John Long, unfortunately, who died recently, a few days ago. So John Long is considered one of the founders of UK HCI as a discipline, and he was already exploring this area with IBM during his time at the Medical Research Council Applied Psychology Unit in Cambridge from around 1974. His research started in the psychology of typing and how we correct typos, and we work on menu design, and he was later interested in frameworks of HCI, method development, and evaluation of methodology, analysis of design of social-technical systems. And he also applied his expertise to knowledge to computer-supported cooperative work and many other topics. When Long retired, the University College London was founded as UCLIC, so UCL Interaction Center, under the directorship of Professor Harold Timbleby, that you saw interviewed in the video at the beginning. And UCLIC is currently directed by Yvonne Rogers. Another community that was involved in HCI was the already cited Cambridge Applied Psychology Unit. And it consisted of a group of psychologists keen on using computers, understanding interaction from a psychology point of view. They also investigated the psychology of programming, how software developers actually work to create new software, and they formed the Psychology of Programming Interest Group. And this involved Thomas Green, David Gilmour, Marian Petre, but also other people in the Applied Psychology Unit were Alan Blackwell, Richard Young. Other academics were scattered around the UK and did HCI research. One example is Alan Newell. You have seen him talking about extraordinary users in the video at the beginning. And his career has been devoted primarily for supporting elderly and disabled people since the 1970s. He was based at the University of Southampton before moving to Dundee University, where he is now emeritus professor. There are other groups like University of York, Queen Mary, and others. Like the University of York, as I mentioned, has recently had a very nice, reunion where they, reconstructed the history of the department, and I'm planning of having interviews with them soon. But another important part in the history of British HCI was the Alvey Programme. So the Alvey Programme was a large-scale research and development initiative that was launched by the British government in 1983, and one of the key goals was promoting the collaboration between industry, academia, and government in the development of information technology. And it was a response to the Japanese fifth-generation computer. There was like a 10-year initiative launched in 1982 by Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry to develop massive computers based on parallel computing and logic programming. And it's fifth generation. It's called fifth generation computer after because it's the fifth generation of computer hardware after vacuum tubes, transistor, integrated circuits, and microprocessors. So the Alvey Programme changed the way computer research was organized in the UK, and it was focused on 4 strands: software engineering, intelligent knowledge-based systems, man-machine interaction, that is the part that is of our interest, and advanced microelectronics, very large-scale integration designed to produce integrated circuits. It was sponsored by 200 million of public funds and 150 million from the industry. And this gave a major input to the development of HCI in the UK, and it was directed by Brian Oakley. At the time, it was the secretary of the Science and Engineering Research Council. And the Alvey Programme man-machine interaction objectives were 2. First, to raise the level of UK user interface design in terms of innovation and design methodology in order to let industry to be competitive in the world markets. And second, to improve the British capabilities in pattern analysis to make possible the use of advanced speech recognition and image synthesis techniques in the user interface, such as voice-operated typewriters and methods of text-to-speech conversion. And this is, and these were like a few of the projects that were sponsored by. And usually, typically, it was like an industry and an academic environment that were like working together. And so Alvey influenced and gave strength to the field, contributing to establishing a community, and was very important in providing funding for HCI projects. In particular, in 1986, 3 HCI centres were established in the UK, one in Scotland, comprising the Universities of Watt, Strathclyde and Glasgow, one in the Midlands, and one in London, based at UCL. In parallel, HCI groups in the British industry emerged and developed. In particular, IBM and Hursley Park, International Computers Limited, where Andrew Hudd led the group, Standard Telephone and Cables in Harlow, and also there were in Logica and Data Logic were involved. In another lab was established in the UK, and it was Europark. So the decision was announced from the US by Rank Xerox. So they decided to open Europark in Cambridge. So the idea was to have a system research laboratory in HCI allied with the Palo Alto Research Center, the famous Xerox Park. The center was officially dedicated in June 1988 and was directed by Thomas Moran. There was the principal scientist and manager of the user interface and the collaborative system areas at Xerox Park, and one of the authors of the seminal HCI book, The Psychology of Human-Computer Interaction, that was published in 1983. And work with the Xerox designers in the 1970s to formulate the design methodology for a Xerox Stars desktop metaphor user interface. So the goal of Europark was to understand the broad range of processes in which information systems were shaped to be useful and usable. And in particular, the team explored some collaborative tools. One was called Shared Arc, that also involved video and audio and user-driven bottom-up innovation through tailable user interfaces. Another key moment in the evolution of the HCI community was the establishment of the British Computer Society, where we are now, Specialist Group on Human-Computer Interaction. That was in 1984. And it was a specialist group to provide a forum for researchers, practitioners, and students to exchange ideas and to collaborate on new projects. It had a newsletter. And throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the group played a key role in advancing the study of HCI and also in connecting with the international community. And now it still exists under the name of Interaction Specialist Group. And the idea of having was of Nigel Bevan, that after the example of the ACM Special Interest Group on computer-human interaction in the US, that was established in 1982, the SIG-CHI. In the same period, Diane Murray and Dan Draper started the process of creating a journal of the BCS, Interacting with Computers, or IWC. And Murray, when I interviewed her, speaks proudly about the journal. And she said, "We felt as though we needed the tagline to ensure that people knew what sort of journal it was. And although it was the journal of the BCS HCI group, we intended to be international and to cover many areas of HCI." After Alvey, many other areas of the country became involved in HCI research. partly through meetings and increasing use of emails for communications, partly to the various HCI journals and conferences, and also because of individual connections made at conferences and during Alvey or other international programs like European program, Esprit, RACE, and others. There was also a gradual introduction of HCI to the university curricula and a series of academic texts, edited books and textbooks published in the UK. There were new published standards in more specific aspects of HCI, such as screen displays, keyboards, ergonomic issues, and later usability standards. And finally, there was a take-up of HCI research in business research centers, most notably British Telecom and IBM. In addition, new small consultancies offered services, and one was the already cited Tom Stewart's system concept. So this is where I am now. I've got still a lot of questions. So, I mean, the main behind this project is how did HCI research in the UK emerge and developed? What focus emerged and evolved in the years? Usability, digital inclusion, and things like that. What were the contributions from research laboratories to the UK and to the international community, and in general, to the development of the discipline? What was the impact of the Alvey Programme? And what has been the evolution in the relationship between research, industry, and the public sector? And also the relationship between HCI and AI, if we think about also what happened with Alvey. So another question I asked, and I'm collecting, what people that were there think is what is distinctive about the HCI community in the UK. And Professor Alan Newell replied, I think that British researchers are more interested in the sociological aspects of computers as opposed to the American researchers. But these, of course, are gross generalization. We're focused on the technology rather than the people. So I think the British researchers have raised the awareness that human-computer interaction is about people and not about computer. Diane Murray commented that it was generally felt there were differences between the UK and European approach and the US. So the US researchers were more interested in practical applications and in the mechanics of interaction and interface design, while the British community was more psychological and ergonomically focused. And Professor Gilbert Cocton thinks that the UK is, what is peculiar about the UK is the interdisciplinary working and the funding regime. So the Alvey project made people work together, and the interdisciplinary research centers make people work together and risk-taking and boldness. So these are what I presented so far. I have to thank the Archives of IT and the WCIT. I am currently visiting at the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge as part of the Modern History of Mathematics program. So I'm also thankful to them for allowing me to be in the UK and continue my research. I'm currently a Juan de la Cierva Fellowship at the University of Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, but also John Tucker, the History of Computing collection in Swansea University was, helpful, and it's probably going to be even more interesting when I'm going to research in their archive. They have an Alvey collection of documents. The University of Edinburgh that kindly hosted me in 2023 to record Gilbert Cocton and Diane Murray interviews. The kindness and of the Human-Computer Interaction Research Group at the University of York that welcomed me in June last year, and all the interviews and the scholars who have been supporting me so far. So, further work roadmap. First, apply for funding in the UK abroad, which is fundamental. Continue mapping HCI communities, industry, sector, publications and projects. Record new oral history interviews, collecting also personal materials, reminiscences, published and unpublished, and also continue with archival research, corporate, public, and in universities. And you are welcome to contact me at the 2 emails I'm providing here. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you, comments, corrections, improvements, and whatever you, for anything, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Elisabetta. That was really interesting. Comprehensive review of everything in HCI since the start. Questions?
Okay.
Hold on.
Yes, I can find the right one.
The overhead microphones, is it?
So I think we're probably online. Can I ask everybody to speak up and speak clearly so the microphone will pick you up okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure you are.
I'm Philip Carnelli. Hello. Yeah, it was a very interesting trip down memory lane. I was wondering, might be a bit early in your research, but I was wondering how much impact all of this has had on the industry in general, like how much influence the British focus. You know, we've been somewhat overwhelmed by the American focus on technology, I think. And just to give a simple example that occurred to me, when I was learning to program and becoming introduced to IT, one of the big things that we always knew was that a non-reflective screen was much easier to work with. And in those days, it had to be monochrome, and it was sort of a special sort of ambery colour, because that was most easy to work with. But then people like Apple came along, and you cannot find an Apple laptop with a non-reflective screen because it's easier for them to sell. It looks brighter in the shops. And I wonder how much influence this HCI research and all this wonderful work has actually had on the industry. I don't know whether you've got a comment or other people. I'm a bit worried it hasn't.
Yeah. So for this specific question, I think that it would be very, so this is like part of what I'm trying to, examine with in particular, with the focus on the UK. But yeah, I think that's, surely it's one of the things that I would like to achieve at the end of the analysis. So basically the idea is that first map all the communities, and then within each community, I identify what were the main subject and talk the evolution in the years. And through that, I will, analyze their interaction with industry, and in particular that, it's a gap that I need to fill now, because I started with interviewing academics, and so the industry part, especially in the UK, I know where I have to look, but I haven't looked there properly. So yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Message saying the sound has gone down and you're answering the question. So.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, you're on. So please speak loudly and clearly.
Okay.
Brian Randell online. Brian, yeah.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for the talk. Let me be provocative and suggest that many of the most important HCI developments came out of Xerox PARC. Is Xerox PARC part of the HCI community?
okay. I mean, it's part of the HCI history, yeah, and yeah, in some sense, you can think about it as part of, I mean, as far as I see it as HCI, I mean, major HCI development there, but in the 70s, where the HCI community was not, you know, like established as a discipline. So in some sense, they prefigured what would become the HCI community as an established discipline in the 80s with, you know, what the main thing I'm thinking about is the CCI and the BCS group. So, does this answer your question? Or have you got comments or ideas about this?
Content with that answer, Brad?
So you can hear it.
I would be.
I found it difficult to hear how the volume was coming up and going down and mainly staying down.
You need to speak to this.
So there is. So I would try.
Speak up towards the ceiling.
Okay. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's clearer.
Okay. So it's weird to speak to the ceiling. So you know there is research in HCI before HCI is established as a discipline, and so there is HCI research done in the 60s and the 70s, and then there is, like, you know, the 80s, where there's the community that becomes established thinking about the CCI, the ACM, or the British HCI group of the BCS. So in this respect, Xerox PARC researched HCI, but particularly in the 70s, kind of, it's part of the history, and then became part of the community. Does this make sense?
Thank you. There was a question here.
Yes, I slightly take dispute at the title of your talk about being front punch cards. I started with paper tape in the late 70s, but even at that time, sorry, can't help everybody. Yes, I spent years winding up paper tapes and treading on them. Even in those days, when we were designing embedded applications for aircraft, for example, and you touched on World War II and aircraft, we still had an interface with the end user, which was, he wasn't necessarily aware he was using a computer, and that we had ergonomic problems straight away. The old analog computers used to rotate steadily. When we went digital, they clicked 5 times a second. The pilot can't wait to watch the rotation at 5 times a second. He's looking outside. That was one problem. Another problem was trying to insert lat and long when there wasn't space in the aeroplane for a keyboard, even 10 keys. We ended up bizarrely with the digital watch interface of click to move on and click to increase, just 2 buttons, because the pilot can do that while he's flying the aeroplane. So ergonomics has been around in quite an advanced way, even since the 70s.
Yes, even earlier.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Even earlier. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I'll probably put you in touch with the lady who designed the tornado cockpit as well.
Please, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Dan Hayton. Interesting, one of my old computer programming students from many, many years ago actually has just retired as Chief Operating Officer of the Assistive Technology Industry Association. The idea behind that is to, if you like, is to promote the people who have difficulties in using with computers for reasons of dyslexia, physical handicap, and so on. Are you going to have a look at that area in your future research, or?
Yes, I mean, this is like, the part on that, Professor Alan Newell calls extraordinary users. It's one of the most interesting to me. And there is a comment that Professor Alan Newell said that, disabled users are the canary in the coal mine. So you can learn a lot by that. But also, So every new interface is, it's like every technology can bring a number of advantages, but and also like be a limitation. So there's this, yes, absolutely. It is like an interesting part of CI I want to look at. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was never part of the HCI community, although at various times in my career was interested in what they were doing because of that work I was trying to do. I have a worry about almost the premise behind your work, which is to focus on one particular country. I'm conscious that after Alvey, the next thing I think of are the EU coordinated projects that led to Esprit. I think there was one in between, a name in between, which is eluding me. Also, I spent quite a lot of time in the 1990s involved in international activities in computing, including in IFIP. The Technical Committee 13, which Brian Shackel was heavily involved in establishing, created international meeting places. Esprit funding promoted mobility. I mean, these are all good things, but they run slightly counter to having a framework for a study that has British. It seems to me you actually need to look at the development of the subject, I think I would argue globally, and then, if you wish, highlight the contribution, which in this area is certainly significant, of people whom we would identify as being British. I sensed here you were telling us about things that you'd identified as British, but not really setting it into a global perspective. If I can make one final quick comment, I think there are two drivers that I've seen. One is new applications and demand for new applications driving research. Terry was talking about flying aircraft. In a sense, if you want to fly a supersonic aircraft, then there are aspects of the design of the cockpit which force you to address HCI issues that perhaps haven't been addressed before. You then have technological advances which make things possible. And I think of the development of things like the mouse. Those of us that went to on the CCS trip to Lausanne were shown the very the replicas, and I think some of them were original mice that came along. Now that, in a sense, is an enabling technology for certain HCI advances. So I think that I have a worry about labelling things starting from a British perspective. I have a feeling you need to look at the way the subject has advanced and then identify the British contribution.
Yes, so I completely agree with you. So what I've done in this presentation, so if you read the article, actually, I address everything. So I do the whole history, but so I kind of sliced it just to, because I thought that for this specific audience, some things could have been kind of taken for granted and just to let emerge these. And I'm very cautious about the limitation of, like cutting the UK out of the bigger picture, because it's not. It was just like, it's just like a way to start to make the connections better, to isolate that. But it's not that I think that the British community was isolated within the country and didn't have, actually, I try to highlight how the community had, connections with Europe, connections with the US and all. But yes, maybe I have to communicate this better. In the, how can I say, in respect to the work on the ergonomics for pilots and for, I completely agree with the fact that there are like some specificities about, HCI in this kind of field. But I also think that we don't have to forget that when we look at pilots, we look at a specific category of people. When we look at tutors today, we look at a more general, a kind of use that is by virtually anyone. And when I say anyone, we are all pretty much aware that in the cases where children, this is very big, dispute about what time children should start using mobile phones and these kind of things. But if we look at that, we cannot certainly compare like a user that is like layman or like everyone that is using computers, phones, and whatever, and a pilot. So I see a pilot as the programmer of the 50s and 60s and probably 70s. But now things have changed. So, but yes, it's all, pretty much welcome. And again, this is not this is, I was kind of aware that this is the state of the research at the moment exposes me to, not having thought about enough. And so, yes, every kind of critique is pretty much welcome.
Hi, I'm Saskia. I graduated last summer studying product design, and throughout my sort of degree, I sort of gained a real interest in interaction. So for me, I was designing physical products, and so for my sort of major project or my version of a dissertation, I was designing an accessible dishwasher, so people who can't bend down to reach the racks, who can't replace the salt, all the different sort of interactions everyday users have with that product. And that's what sort of has sort of made me come to this talk. So thank you very much for that. And my question was around, once you've sort of collected all your data and you sort of, all the research of the history, are you going to be able to draw up conclusions of where you think the HCI industry will go into the future? As someone who's starting out their career and who's really interested in HCI and ergonomics, I sort of would like to be able to understand where I can take the industry and sort of learn from the history of it.
Okay, yeah. So I do think that looking at history can be absolutely an inspiration for the future. In this particular moment, the focus is on the past and in understanding how it developed. But yes, possibly.
Sorry, Dan Hayden again. One of the things that struck me about this, I'm basically a sort of commercial computer systems developer. And the thing that I thought about this is that we're looking at CHI as well. How the computer serves the user, as well as getting information and control of the black box. The black box has to talk back to the user. And one of the things we discovered was that even if it's not particularly useful, is that if you can send some information back to the person interacting with this computer screen, you then get a much more positive connection with the application you're trying to run. I mean, it may be completely not mind-numbingly boring what you're asking people to do in a commercial setup, but as long as they can see something coming back, they feel part of the activity, so that there's the other way, the computer communicating to the user, which is interesting because it divert off into this is by Donald Trump. For the 1956 UNESCO conference on computing, there were two, if you like, competing organisations for representing the British computer industry. There was the IEE and there was the London Computer Group. And the London Computer Group were a bunch of users. And the IEE committee that was reviewing what was happening and what the opposition, i.e. the London Computer Group, were up to, was really quite upset because these users were thinking about the sociological aspects of computing instead of the electronics. But what won out in the end was the user group that went on to be the genesis of BCS. So in fact, the people are important in both directions, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you've ever been on a flight which is delayed, the most frustrating thing is no information.
Yes.
Even if, I completely agree. Even if the information is terrible. So, totally with you, Dan. Any other questions? Lots of messages online. Does anybody want to articulate any of them?
Question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, can I ask, from your broad historical perspective, has intellectual property law had an influence on the field of HCI? I'm thinking particularly things like Microsoft's ribbon interface that was granted a patent in 2013 for largely commercial rather than ergonomic motivations, and it raises the question of whether intellectual property law encourages innovation and protects it, as it should do, or whether it actually stifles and restricts innovation, and how that's happening in the field of HCI.
This is a very, 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 very question. So, for me, you know.
Oh God.
Oh, sorry. So this is a. This is a very. This has to do with interfaces. So,
It's the green dots.
It's a human-computer interface.
So I think that the topic of patents is something that I hadn't particularly thought carefully, but actually, it kind of emerged in the sense that I was recently discussing with someone, and there was this academia where you tend to share and publish and go to conferences, and it's all about sharing knowledge. And there's industry where it's actually it's a bit different. And so the theme of patents is actually a very, 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 very good one in this respect, because politically, for me, patents are dangerous, okay? I tend not to like them, but I can understand how they came to be in the past. So one thing is to look at the past, and the other thing is to look at the future. And and this is very personal. I'm completely against patents, also because we all, as human beings, rely on knowledge that humanity has built in so many years. So maybe the last bit of that discovery is new and is yours, but you are on the shoulders of so many giants that, you should invent the wheel first and then everything. Then, it's impossible in one life. So at the same time, there is something I've been thinking a lot in this respect of themes that are related to how we are interacting with computers and technological devices in particular when it comes to the medical applications. And in particular, now, it's not something so new. If we think about pacemakers, we have been having them for such a long time. We've been having more advanced things. So I was very, very, very impressed by reading I think it was an article on IEEE Spectrum about bionic eyes that were implanted. And the company that was developing them, commercializing them, exist. And people that had implanted bionic eyes and could see again, one day to another, couldn't see again. So, and this is where, when we talk about patents, when we talk about closed knowledge, when we talk about these kind of things, when it comes to the medical applications, when it comes to computers that are not some, gadgets, devices, and objects, but are something that are pretty much needed by people to live, like a pacemaker. And we are all very much aware of the issues with pacemakers and the fact that there are a lot of security issues there. So, that is one of the, that is one of the parts of the research about HCI that are probably the one that interest me the most in terms of legal, ethical, but also linked to what we are becoming. So that is one idea. It's like, I'm starting from here. Let's see where I'm going to go. Maybe nothing about the British industry, or yes, but you just reminded me how I really do feel it's important to think about, like the ubiquity. It really means also thinking about something that is really affecting our bodies and our health. And this is where we also think about patents and this in a different way. When you think about patents applied to a commercial product is one thing. When you think of patents applied to something that has to do with health and something that is going to be embedded in a body, it's a very completely different perspective, and this is very important. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Last question, Mary Hawking.
Hi. In general practice, some work was done by Glyn Hayes back in the late 1980s on interactions between the computer, the doctor, and the patient, three-way communications. How much of HCI deals with the possibility of a third party being involved, not just the computer and the operator?
Sorry, can you? I'm sorry because I heard part of the question and I missed the name.
Sorry, is this better?
No, it's the same, but can you repeat? Because
Yeah, right. In general practice, which is very computerized, okay. Glyn Hayes, back in the late 1980s, did a good deal of work on consulting using a computer, the GP, and the patient.
Right.
How much of HCI is involving third-party participation, as it were, rather than direct operator-computer interactions?
So this question makes me think about the Christopher Evans. He had a project in the 70s about, say, when a patient arrives to hospital and needs to, they need to be assessed. And the research that Evans led made him come to the conclusion that actually for person would be easier to speak with a machine rather than with a person, because it felt more like neutral. And so he developed this system that eventually was also applied to several hospitals in the UK. So this is like a project that made me think about, yes, this is possible. But yes, very, very interesting. Another like thing to reflect on. But I mean, for me, like all these, like lines on investigations are like super, super, super helpful to also to reorganize all questions and topics. Because I think that today I was more really thinking about some kind of historiography, and probably I should reorganize my my thoughts about, like topics instead. But I mean, it's probably a two-way thing, to see what was researched and to reorganize it on trends. Does it make sense?
I said last question, but Chris Reynolds.
Okay. In the 1980s, there was a bulletin board being run called HICOM, which was very much involved with allowing people that were interested in human-computer interaction in the UK that were not necessarily based at a well-funded university. Have you looked into that at all? It published a lot of book reviews, of which I have got probably copies of all.
Oh, okay, so let's be in touch. They told me that I have to be brief, so because I am not sure I got all the names. So yes, please let's talk about this. Write me, and we continue the yes.
I'll let you have details.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Really. Thank you.
Well, Elizabeth, that's obviously been very stimulating to us, and I suspect perhaps somewhat stimulating for you.
Yes.
We've had a lot of really good questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
And perhaps we've given you some new avenues for research. So
yeah, so it reminded me of things that I left, like. Yeah, thank you.
And you weren't trying to cover the entire waterfront, but giving us a focused presentation. So thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, our next meeting is quite soon, on the 28th of February, Friday. Meeting with the Newcomen Society and Francisco Gonzalez Redondo. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, probably not. We'll be talking about Leonardo Torres Quevedo, pioneer of computing, automatics, and artificial intelligence. And I think he was mentioned in the lecture which names. It's gone. I'll think of it, I'll put it on the note. Mine's gone dead. Anyway, thank you all for coming.
On the radio. The last episode of it mentioned the problem I've got about